All right. Let's grab our Bibles this afternoon, this evening, whatever time today. Let's grab our Bibles today. Let's go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 6. Let's start there. I believe we're going to be continuing on our study in our dispensations that we're looking at. We've been over two of them. And if you're not real interested in how God dealt with people differently during different time periods, hopefully you will at least get some lessons out of each one. We've talked about the age of innocence first. That's Adam and Eve in the garden, how God dealt with them, and you can learn from that, or at least I've learned from that, that it just takes one sin to mess everything up. It takes one act of disobedience to separate you from God, but God is still gracious and God is still merciful and God still desires that relationship with you. Last time we went over conscience. That meant with knowledge. That was the second dispensation. It was about 1650 years. We talked about that. And basically, what I learned from that one is that you can't follow your heart. And when man is left to make his own choices, there's a 1 in a million chance that you will actually follow God and try to do what's right. Noah and his family were the only ones spared from the flood. And this is going to lead us into our third dispensation. I did find out, though, we're in Genesis chapter 6. I want to point this out because I told you I'd studied out and find it. I thought there was a verse in the Bible that specifically said that Noah preached for 120 years. I did not find that verse because apparently it's not in the Bible. Unless you found it, then we can say you found it and you win. But I wanted to explain that a little bit. Where I got the 120 years was Genesis 6:3, which says, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." And we know that doesn't mean that men will only live to be 120 years old, because so many of them lived more than that, longer than that. Noah was 600 years old whenever the flood came. So, and even after the flood, we got people living for over 120 years. So it's not talking about that. But I got the 120 years as far as that's how long the Lord was putting up with the foolishness of men until he sent the flood. As far as whenever verse 5, well, it might be 5. No. Um, verse 5. And God said that saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. I believe it was that condition that was lasting for 120 years, because Noah was not, he himself was not preaching constantly for 120 years, at least not specifically in the Bible. It could be, look at Genesis 5:32. It says, and Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we know Noah was 500 years old whenever he started having his boys, or depending on how you read that, that's whenever he had all of his boys. I think that's whenever he started, he was 500 years old. And we know from Genesis 7:11 that Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. In Genesis 7:11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, that same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So it could be that Noah was preaching for 120 years. Maybe he's the one fulfilling Genesis 6:3, if that's the proper interpretation of that verse or not. And if so, that means he was preaching before he had those boys. So maybe from 480 to 600, he was preaching it. We know that he was preaching and trying to get folks on the ark. And I just wanted to straighten that out a little bit. That's basically where I was getting the 120 years. But that's not our study for tonight. That's trying to fix the study from last time. So hope that makes you feel better. So the next dispensation that we're going to be going over, the one we're going to go over tonight, is that of human government. Human government. All right, since I love spelling government, I will spell it the way that they probably do as well. There's three particular aspects of this, of the last dispensation that really stuck out to me, the dispensation of conscience. Because over 1,650 years during the dispensation of conscience, all humanity was very close together. They weren't very spread out. All society was right there together. I believe in I guess the world calls it Pangea. You know that the all the continents were together, and then the flood, and you see that they break apart because if you take the continents now, you can kind of piece them together, and it looks like they all went in one land. I believe I can't back it up with much of anything, but I believe that whenever the Bible says He gathered, well, let's look at it. Let's look at it. Maybe I can back it up a little bit. Genesis chapter 1. I believe that all the land was in one place before the flood. And here's the verse that I'll give you for that. Look at Genesis 1, verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land, singular, earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. So he's calling the water, the seas, plural, almost like there's rivers and lakes and things like that. But all the dry land is together. I believe all that land was together. Then after the flood, that continental drift, if that's what science wants to call it or whatever, that's when that took place, is all the force from all the water because of the flood. I forget what that anyway. That's that's the point I was trying to make. Is that before the flood, people were very close together. I noticed that in that dispensation of conscience that people became saturated with wickedness over time and that man was his own judge. When mankind surrounds itself with other people, with mankind, it stays far away from God and it seems to draw closer to one another. You start depending on people and you stop depending on God because you have other sources, you have other help. If it's just you and God, if you can't do it, you're turning to the Lord. But if it's you and your family and your extended family and then your government and you got this program and you got that program and you've got all these other things to help you along, you've got to go through a lot of things before you finally get down to the bottom of the barrel and turn to the Lord. So what happens whenever you get a lot of people grouped up together, they start depending on one another, which is not necessarily a bad thing, except whenever they never turn to God because they're so busy dealing with one another. That's what happened during the dispensation of conscience. And so you had all the wickedness that happened in Noah's day. I want you to keep this in mind as we're going over the dispensation of human government. This book, the books of the Bible associated with the dispensation of human government, is just portions of Genesis. It starts in Genesis 9, and it right at the end of the flood, and it goes through Genesis chapter 11. I wrote the dates there for you approximately from 2348 BC to about 1920 BC. So it's roughly 400 years is how long this was going on. And like I said, by dispensation, we mean how God deals differently with different people during different periods of time, all of which God exhibits his grace through faith to certain individuals, to everybody willing to follow him in faith. The primary characteristic of this dispensation is that of governance. Okay, look at Genesis chapter 9. Man could not control himself during the age of conscience, so now God sets up a government to be able to help control man who could not control himself. Does that make sense? God left men and women to make their own decisions for 1,650 years there during the dispensation of conscience to find out that that leads to their thoughts and intents of their heart being only evil continually. So that didn't work out so well. So God says, let me give you some guidelines here. And look at Genesis chapter 9, verse number 3. This is right after the flood. God's talking to Noah. Genesis 9:3. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require at the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. God says, now if you're going to kill a person, you are going to be killed. God said, I made man in the image of God. I made man in the image of God. And if you kill him, I'm going to kill you back. That's a rule God set up. He institutes capital punishment here. And man will be the one to carry out the sentencing and punishment on other men. That's what he said. Verse 6, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For the image of God, for the image of God made he man. Keep a marker here. We'll be back in Genesis, but turn to Romans chapter 13. This is something God set up from here on out, is he sets up a government, he sets up a rule of law. God gives the law, and he determines that some people, that this government, these individuals that he puts in a place of authority, they are the ones to be carrying out the punishment that God says that he wants meted out. Look at Romans chapter 13. Look at verse number 1. Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. So if you've got some power over you in your life, if you've got someone of authority over you, God put them there. Okay? The powers that be are ordained of God. Whoso therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. That means God put the president that's in the White House in the White House. God put the last president in the White House. You say, well, I like one, but I didn't like the other. God put both of them there. Oh, no, see, last time they stole the election. God put the president there. The powers that be are ordained of God. He didn't say you're always going to get the leader you like. Sometimes he gives you the leader that you deserve. Verse 3. Verse 2 again. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers, remember the one God put in charge? For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, that's the rulers that God put in power, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So God set up these powers of authority over us. God ordained the powers, and he gave those powers a job. He said those that are doing evil, like men who kill other men, it's the power's job, the government's job, to execute that individual. God says, okay, this deserves the death penalty, so I want the government, I want the power that I put in power to carry out, to bear the sword. But if you don't break the law, if you don't go against God, you've got nothing to worry about, because that government, their main job is to punish evildoers. That's what it says, verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works. You're doing right, you've got nothing to worry about. But to the evil, you better be afraid if you're breaking the law. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. If you're not breaking the law, they're not going to mess with you. For he, the rulers, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So God set up government, God set up rulers over us to carry out capital punishment on all those who do evil. That's their God designed and their God designated role is to punish evildoers. So if we have a government that does not punish evildoers, they are not doing what God instituted government to do. And if they are unwilling to carry out capital punishment, then they are not doing what God instituted that government to do. Do you ever, I bet New York probably doesn't even have capital punishment. Do they have capital punishment here? Well, we did in Oklahoma, and every time there'd be somebody executed, doesn't matter how many people he killed, you'd have protesters out there in front of the governor's mansion saying, abolish the death penalty, don't kill for me or whatever, because they're complaining about the government doing what God said the government's supposed to be doing. Put to death the evildoers. Well, you say, what evil deserves the death penalty? Glad you asked. Turn to Exodus chapter 21. Keep a marker in Romans. We'll probably be back. If you didn't already, just lose it. Exodus chapter 21. Again, I'm giving you Bible. I'm not giving you my opinion. My opinion's not worth anything. The Bible's worth an awful lot. Here's what God says, what crimes God says deserves the death penalty. Okay? Exodus 21. We want a government. We want a good government. We want them to do what God orchestrated and made them to do. Why God set up that government. Exodus 21, start at verse 12. God setting up his law, he says this. Exodus 21:12. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from mine altar, that he may die. God says if someone kills someone else accidentally, that does not deserve the death penalty. But if it's premeditated murder, he planned it out, he's waiting, ambush, whatever it was, he kills another man, that guy should be put to death. That's what the Bible says. Verse 15. And he that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. You kill your parents, you're going to get killed. Verse 16. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. That's a kidnapper. God says kidnappers should be put to death. That's God. That's what God says. Verse 17. And he that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Ooh, that just got serious, didn't it? Not going to have a lot of talking back from those kids, are you? Yeah, well, maybe God has a reason for some of these things. You cursing them. That means you're going. It's more than just no. I don't want to do that. I mean, they are railing on their parents. They're wanting God to get their parents. Well, God says put them to death. Jump down to verse 28. If an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it had been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. So he's got this ox that won't stay in his pen. The ox is known to get out. He's got a weak fence. Maybe he's got an extra angry ox, whatever it is. But that ox and that owner has a reputation of that ox getting out and causing trouble. That ox gets out and it runs over a kid, it stabs him with its horn, it kills a child, and they said, okay, that's it. The ox gets put to death and the owner gets put to death because they didn't do something that would have stopped that from happening. God says that deserves a death penalty. Turn to Exodus 22, verse 18. We're not hitting every one. I'm just giving you some of them. Exodus 22:18. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So witchcraft would put you to death. All the sorcery, necromancing, communicating with the dead, you're doing casting spells, all those things should be put to death according to God. Not my opinion, it's Bible. Verse 19. Whosoever lieth with a beast shall surely be put to death. There's bestiality. And Exodus, you can, or I'm sorry, Leviticus. In Leviticus, you can turn there if you want and if you're quick. But Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, we see also that adultery carries the death penalty. And it's not just for one of them, it's for both of them. In Leviticus 20, verse 10, the Bible says, and the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, and the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. You think if the government carried out the death penalty for cheating on your spouse, that you'd have a whole lot of hookup apps and a bunch of movies about, hey, let's fool around and have these open marriages and let's do this and that? No. If the government did their job and scared people into not going against the word of God, there'd be a lot less sin in this nation. Here's one that'll get celebrated next month. Leviticus 20, verse 13. If a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Homosexuality in the Bible was deserving of the death penalty. Rape in the Bible warranted the death penalty. And there's several others. But could you imagine how much better the nation would be today if some of these crimes still carried the death penalty? How much child sex trafficking would we have in this nation if you got caught, you get put to death? That would stop a lot of crimes. Now listen, I'm not saying, okay, God said you're supposed to kill homosexuals under his law when he's talking to the nation of Israel. That means we need to go out, we need to, no. We're not breaking the law. Remember, it's the government's job to carry out this death penalty. God ordained the powers that be. It is their job to carry out the sentences that God says they're supposed to carry out. God lays down the law. And if you look at the founding documents of our nation, they lined up very closely with the Bible. The death penalty laws, they were based off the Bible. But it's the government's job. You say they've been failing at this. It's not your job to be the government. You think it is? Run for office and see if God ordains you to be in that position. You can't say, well, my authority messed up and so I'm going to do his job. Not if God didn't ordain you to do that. God instituted government to carry out the punishment for breaking the law. But as you know, the government doesn't always do their job. Let's turn back to Genesis chapter 9. So God sets up these, he's starting to set up some rules here. He's letting Noah and his family know, hey, listen, there needs to be some rules. I left you for 1,650 years to just follow your heart, obey your conscience, which I gave everybody. That's not working. I'm going to start giving you some rules, and I'm going to assign an establishment or individuals in a position of authority to carry out punishment to help you obey the rules that I give you. Because it didn't work out before. So now I'm going to give you some rules. And that first of which being, if you kill somebody, you're going to get killed right back. So Genesis chapter 9, look at verse 1. Let's look at the test administered by God. Here's what God says to Noah, Genesis 9:1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, here's the command, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So they're to be fruitful, they're to multiply, replenish the earth. That means fill the earth up. It means multiply, have a bunch of kids, and spread out. You're going to fill up the earth. Okay? We're going to fill it all up. What did God want? He wanted man to govern himself in a structured, ordered manner. Man had already destroyed himself before during the age of conscience, but by the grace of God, he saved humanity with Noah. What's going to help man from killing himself again is by being spread out after multiplying, verse 1, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, and keeping godly punishment in place. There's verse 6. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. So God's trying to help man out and say, listen, we need to fill up the earth again. I already wiped out all the wicked people there, all the ones that were sinning so much. So now I want you to fill up the earth again. This time, I want you to spread out and kill anybody that kills anybody else. We're not going to have a bunch of murderers in this land. So to deter that, we're going to kill murderers. I want you to understand God likes separate nations. God is not for a one world government. You'll know when God's for a one world government because Jesus Christ will be sitting on the throne. That's the only one world government God approves of. And even, even that one comes by division. Whenever the Lord shows up to set up his government, he kills all the wicked. Okay? But look at Acts chapter 17. Keep a marker. We'll probably be back in Genesis. But turn to Acts chapter 17. I want you to see what the Lord says here. Because he likes separate nations. He likes people spread out. And that's what he commanded. Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, all of it. Keep going around, fill it up. Acts 17, look at verse 24. Acts 17:24. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. So God made all these different nations. He made them of one blood. We all come from Adam and Eve, okay? And he spread us out over all the face of the earth. That's what he wants. He hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitations. So he said, okay, spread out and respect one another's boundaries. God set up the bounds of their habitation. God made boundaries to the nations. He likes that. And it's not for him to say, I like this color of people, but not this color of people. Okay? They are all of one blood. Skin color doesn't really matter at all to God. Okay? He cares about the blood. He's the one that wrapped him in that skin anyway. He didn't wrap him up because he hates those. Okay? I've heard preachers before use this verse to speak against interracial marriages. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. There's only a problem with that is that's anti-biblical. You know, before I knew any Bible, I used to think, well, that's just weird whenever people from different races marry and everything. That's just maybe that's not right. I don't know. Then you start reading your Bible and you find out Moses had a black wife, and God didn't get mad at Moses for it. God got mad at Aaron and Miriam and Aaron, because they were the ones giving Moses a hard time for having a black wife. God went after the ones that had the problem with it, not the one that married someone of another race. God didn't have a problem with it, so you shouldn't have a problem with it. So why does God like separate nations then? Why is it? Let's keep reading. Got Acts 17, 26. Let's read that one again. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of all of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. Notice a semicolon, same thought, keep going. Verse 27, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. It doesn't matter what nation you're in, it doesn't matter what race you are from, God is not far from any one of us. And God says if we keep them separate, if we get them to spread out, if we just fill up some of this open space and let them respect some borders and some boundaries, they're going to seek after God. Have you ever noticed that smaller communities have more respect and fear for God than bigger communities? Have you ever noticed that? We like to try to blame it on states, but it has to do with cities. You ever see the electoral college maps and everything? You see the nation all red except for a blue chunk here and a little blue piece here and a blue piece here. What's that? In the blue places is where almost half the population lives, even though it's all compacted together. It's people that are stacked one on top of another, literally. I mean, they're in these high-rise buildings and they're just jam-packed together. And whenever you get people jam-packed in together, too many of them, they don't follow God anymore. But whenever you spread them out, you get some land out there, they get a little time alone and they're not always bombarded with people all the time. They draw closer to God. Why? Because now you can enjoy his creation a little bit. You can get a little breather. You could, God forbid, have a little problem that you got to turn to God for instead of everybody else that you're piled on top of. If too many people get too close together, they turn against God as a whole. That's what happened in the age of conscience. All the people were stacked together, and then by the end of it, all their thoughts were only evil continually. What happened? They were too close together. So after God wiped them out, he said, okay, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Get out, spread out. Let's fill this thing up. Why? Because if you stay a little distance between yourselves, then you turn to God. As you think about it, I mean, look at America today. Where's all the violence and murder and vandalism happening? Big cities. Where's the sin and debauchery most prevalent? Big cities. And that's what happens. God likes people to be in smaller groups. It's easier to turn to God when there aren't so many people around you giving you their opinions. Because remember, God's a personal God. It's easier for you to get a hold of God quietly and personally when you aren't surrounded by a lot of people who are consumed with worldly thoughts. So God commanded Noah and his descendants to multiply and to scatter. Let's see the test failed by man. Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11. Let's start in verse 1. Genesis 11:1. So here we have what about 400 years after the flood stopped. Genesis 11:1, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Who's the they? Just about the whole earth. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us, notice where the focus is, let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. I thought that's what God wanted. Yeah, but we're trying to figure out what we can do. Let's see what we can do. If we can make us a name, mankind here has found common ground with one another. They've assembled together to see what they can accomplish. They have human goals that fly in the face of God's commands. Let's see what happens. There's the test failed by man. They're joining together. They're joining forces to spite God. Genesis 11, verse 5, here's the judgment of God. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. That's the first skyscraper, by the way. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. God recognizes that these people all united together can get a lot of things accomplished. God doesn't want you accomplishing everything together. He wants you accomplishing things with Him. He wants to be the source. He wants to be the power, not society. It's not government's job to provide for you. It's God's job to provide for you. Verse 7, Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad. Oh, looky there. Who scattered them abroad? Lord did. He said, I want you to scatter. They all join together and they make a tower to go up to God, up to heaven. And God says, okay, I'm going to confound your speech. I'm going to give you all the different languages that we have now. And he said, I will scatter you abroad. Verse 8, so the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, where God wanted them to be. And they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. You ever wonder how those little hidden tribes got there and got hidden? God scattered them there. God drove them off. Oh, this hidden tribe in Africa, they just found them. First time we ever know that. No, God scattered them there. That's how they got there. So God confounds their language and He spreads them through all throughout the world, just like He wanted them to. And herein is the grace of God for this dispensation. Instead of wiping them out again, He promised not to do that with another flood. But God is saving mankind from themselves and giving them a better opportunity to know Him. Do you realize it's better to be poor and need God and find God than to be rich and never need God and never find God? Well, it's not good to be alone. No, but you don't have to be so stacked on top of each other that you're depending on one another and never depending on God. Sometimes it's good to let God move you around a little bit so He can deal with you. God saves these people from themselves. God knows that a single united humanity leads to violence, wickedness, and turning against God. That's why you have it in the big cities. And instead of letting them have their way that leads to destruction, God graciously spreads them throughout the world. And it worked for a long, long time. It helps people reach God when we're not so connected. Problem is, now we're always connected. Now, through technology, electronics, media, transportation, the world's coming all back together. Now we can assemble together without having to be in one place. Now we can always be stuck chit-chatting with everybody across the globe on social media instead of reading our Bible or talking to God about the problem. Now we can just post instead of pray. What happens? We're all gathering ourselves together, and what's that going to lead to? Ignoring God, sin and debauchery, only evil, wicked thoughts in our hearts all the time, and the judgment of God. It kind of goes around in a circle. Okay, it's like God knows it's going to happen. It's like if you read this and you can see where we're at now, you know what's coming next, the judgment of God. So that concludes the dispensation of human government. Man has once again failed to follow the Lord's instructions. Now mankind is spread out and he has all these different languages. So God will once again change how He deals with mankind. Why? Because now He finally got them spread out the way He wants, and now He's going to deal with them differently because man keeps failing everything God sets up. God will show up, give them a command, and they fail, even if it's just one command. And God says, okay, you don't like the command? Go and just follow your heart. Let your conscience be your guide. Wow, that didn't work out. Okay, let me give you one rule. Well, I guess two rules. Kill murderers, spread out and fill up the earth. That's not working. Okay, let's try this again. That's why he keeps trying. He keeps doing something to try to get that relationship with people. Thing is, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who could know it? So next time we'll go over the next one. So we'll stop there tonight.